I usually do a long introduction for a guest speaker, but I'm not going to do a long introduction tonight because I think we all know our very special guest speaker. I will say this, Miriam is the reason I'm here, and I mean that in many, many ways. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Miriam Jerris.
That's because 80% of you are my relatives. Or I wish you were. Okay. So, happy birthday, Jeff. This is your birthday gift, so that you don't have to speak. I've been thinking about these issues for many years, and I have now kind of contextualized them as intellectual integrity and emotional connection. So consider this. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they are not ever going to be born. Richard Dawkins, Unweaving the Rainbow. Dawkins goes on to say that there is a particular instant 9 months before our birth that is the most decisive event in our personal fortunes. It is the moment at which your consciousness suddenly becomes trillions of times more foreseeable than it was a split second before. The instant at which a particular spermatozoon penetrated a particular egg was, in your private hindsight, a moment of dizzying singularity. It was then that the odds against you becoming a person dropped from astronomical to single figures. When I first looked into the eyes of my now 9-year-old granddaughter, I was transported to another place and time and realm. It was like looking into the eyes of the past. She looked exactly like her mother, while still being able to see the future. It's a daily experience, the birth of a child, and it connects us to all humanity and to all living things on earth. But in that moment, I was overwhelmed with emotion and in awe. This event, although full of wonder and heightened experience and excitement, is not rooted in magic, nor is it a cosmic mystery. We know the mechanics and conditions required for fertilization and for birth to result. Does this make the experience of looking into the eyes of your daughter's child when she is barely 4 hours old any less wondrous? Absolutely not. Knowledge does not remove the wonder. 18 months ago, our granddaughter, the now 18-year-old, sang at a wedding at which I officiated, and her mother was the best woman. To say the least, there was love in the room. When Eva started to sing Erev Shel Shoshanim a cappella, you could have heard a pin drop. It was angelic in a purely human way, and as her mother and I exchanged glances, there were tears in both our eyes. Again, wonder and awe. So I've heard the charge for many years that humanistic Judaism only appeals to the head. We are missing the heart and emotion. We are not spiritual enough. When we come together, we are intellectually stimulated, yet not emotionally connected. To some extent, I know what people mean. Earlier this year, I presided over a funeral service of a former temple member. I learned so much about him that I never knew. And this was a family that I had known for many years, although they weren't really intimate friends. Well, later in that day, I was here at Temple at Shabbat services, and a number of people who had attended the funeral had shared the same sentiment with me. There were so many things that they hadn't known about the person. Well, the couple that was talking to me at the time, who we've known each other for probably 35 years, I said to them, you know, we've known each other for a long time, but we don't know that much about each other either. So I've written about this lack of spirituality before, but I realized that I needed to go just a little bit further than stating the problem. I needed to think about ways to change both the perception and the felt experience that humanistic Judaism is solely an intellectual experience. So I begin this examination tonight and will make some suggestions on how we can create a deeper emotional connection. So what about that charge? Does relying on science to discover truth separate us from connection and meaning by relegating us to cold intellect? Is this dichotomy an accurate assessment of humanistic Jewish experience? So first, let's look at science, cold, rational, and sterile, and its underlying message. Carl Sagan, who is the 2015-2016 humanistic Jewish role model, addresses that intellectual concern related to spirituality, and he wrote the following: "Spirit comes from the Latin word to breathe. What we breathe is air, which is certainly matter, however thin. Despite usage to the contrary, there is no necessary implication in the word spiritual that we are talking of anything other than matter, including the matter of which the brain is made, or anything, in fact, outside the realm of science. Well, when I talk about the spirit, or say something is spiritual or inspirational, I'm always referring to something naturalistic, something rooted in this world." According to Sagan, separating science from wonder is also faulty thinking. Science is not only compatible with spirituality, he says it's a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passages of ages, when we grasp the intricacy and the beauty and subtlety of life, then the soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined, is surely spiritual. In its encounter with nature, science invariably elicits a sense of reverence and awe. The very act of understanding is a celebration of joining, merging, even if on a very modest scale, with the magnificence of the cosmos. Although not all humanists define themselves in the same way theologically, not even close, by the way, most agree that there is no personal deity. Not a personal deity that at least listens to us or responds to our requests and our hopes, our wishes or dreams. Humanism does not offer solace for those hoping for a conscious, peaceful afterlife. We must come to terms with the meaning of life without that kind of God. And the only way we can really do this is to confront dying without God. Professor Ronald Aronson, in his book Living Without God, suggests that only in confronting death can we live without fear. Comfort may be found in Epicurus, who said, and I love this, "Death is nothing to us, since when we are, death has not come. And when death has come, we are not." There is no answer to death. This is where the fear comes in. Without afterlife assurances, how does one wrestle with the reality that we will all die, and that after this, nothing? And yet only when we feel our own fears, and we feel them again and again, can we fully live life. Aronson adds that death remains an irresolvable tragedy, the absolute brute fact that we hold off as long as possible, and we know this absolutely. And Friedrich Nietzsche talks about feeling everything in order to be alive. To be wholly alive, he said, when facing death means feeling the negative as well as the positive, not shunning any experience, embracing life even in its strangest and most painful episodes. We must feel the pain in order to feel alive, he continues. And Aronson adds, when we give up the fantasy and practice of living life for a life beyond this life, then and only then do we have the sense of intense energy that comes with saying that this is all there is. There is nothing more. As long as we hesitate and try to invent something beyond, we remove the sense of awe that comes with living life fully and intensely. It is up to each of us to face this reality and all the fear and darkness that may come with it. It is, however, our choice. We are in charge of the attitude that we bring to living. Sherwin Wine, the founder of Humanistic Judaism, described what he called the grand illusion. The grand illusion maintains that we live in a meaningful world, that the universe enforces the moral agenda of human beings, that the fates conspire to reward the good and punish the wicked. Wine then asks, but if this grand illusion is not true, why not just dismiss it? He says, because it makes people feel good, and it offers solace against the pain of truth. Wine offers another alternative. Strength, he says, and I would add meaning and powerful emotional connection, comes from reality. So if I were to have a personal motto, it would be, truth matters. I long ago learned that my obsession with truth was a result of my upbringing and the dynamics in my family of origin. However, it made me a very good candidate to be a humanistic Jew. Humanistic Judaism allows me to live my life with consistency and integrity. My beliefs, my words, my actions all match. There is a satisfaction for me in that far surpasses the promise of an afterlife. Integrity is what I consistently mark as the most significant reason for and the greatest reward of being a humanistic Jew. Living authentically is my grounding, my inspiration, my exhilaration, and my emotional connection. Whether the criticism lodged against humanistic Judaism are true or not matter far less than the perception that they are true. If we do in fact touch the heart and spirit, and there are individuals who do not experience that, then there's something faulty with the delivery system. I'm suggesting that the delivery system, or what actually occurs in a humanistic Jewish community, may be the root of the problem rather than the philosophy itself. This raises the question, how do we move from intellectual integrity to emotional authenticity and connection? How do we enable this in community? Creating strong and connected community is not an easy matter, and luckily, it's not an isolated concern. The organizational development literature is full of new ideas and suggestions, and there are a few of these ideas that I have found noteworthy. The ideas may overlap with one another, but they are consistent with the philosophical approach of humanistic Judaism. Christine Pohl, a Christian pastor, has written a book called Living in Community. She describes 4 practices that are critical to the life of community. And these are embracing gratitude, making and keeping promises, living truthfully, and practicing hospitality. As you might expect, living truthfully and keeping promises are of particular interest to me. The other key factor to Pohl is authenticity, which is derived from truth-telling, keeping promises, and vulnerability. Communities that embrace truth will create a safe place for the vulnerability required for authentic living. Where truthfulness is practiced, communities depend on confidentiality and treating others with gentleness and dignity, and they provide the assurance that members won't abandon one another as they reveal themselves. Truthful communities are communities of encouragement and acceptance. Just over 2 years ago, I had an experience that pushed me to investigate this further. I was driving to Chicago early Saturday morning and listening to NPR's TED Talk show. I heard a presentation by Texas sociologist Brene Brown. Brown addressed the notion of vulnerability and shame and how grappling with those two concepts leads the way to creativity, authenticity, innovation, and change, and thus connection. I was completely captivated, and I apparently was not alone, because Brown's presentation received more than 10 million hits on YouTube. Now, after introducing her ideas, she was flooded with speaking invitations. Everyone wanted to hear her thoughts on creativity and innovation, authenticity, change, and connection. Yet she was repeatedly asked to do so without speaking about vulnerability and shame. You may have already surmised that you cannot speak about one without addressing the other. So in my role with the Society for Humanistic Judaism and as faculty for the International Institute, I've learned some very interesting notions about individuals and groups and the relationship between them. These relationships are mirrors of big systems in biology. Organisms in nature are part of an overall system. Organisms naturally seek the freedom to be self-determined and unique, while at the same time they seek out others for connection. This is true for humans. The interplay between individual needs and the desire for connection contain an inherent paradox that ultimately leads to moments of conflict when the needs of the individual and the needs of the other individuals in the group or the group itself do not coincide. Understanding that we are always a part of a system where our individual needs inevitably conflict with others helps us bridge that gap, the gap between intellectual integrity and emotional connection. And it is that gap that leads to disconnection. Brown asserts connection is why we're here. We're hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives us purpose and meaning. And without it, there is suffering. Connection requires vulnerability. I'll say it again. Connection requires vulnerability. So just take a moment right now to listen to your inner voice as it tells you why what I just said about vulnerability is not right. No way, at least not for me. Lay out your arguments for how you can be connected or creative and not be vulnerable. So now that you've done that, I will reaffirm Brown's claim that there is no get out of vulnerability free card. There's no way to avoid uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure, and the fear and anxiety that accompany them. And once we can internalize that reality, we face the next difficult lesson, that achieving vulnerability is not an easy task, and it is consistently hijacked by shame. Now, Brown's definition of shame is interesting. It's the belief that we're not enough, that we are not worthy of love and belonging. Shame is the fear of disconnection. More specifically, shame is the intensely painful feeling of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Now, this is her conclusion after 6 years, if you can imagine, 6 years of researching shame. Now, it's not the same as the thought that what I did was stupid. It's the thought that not only am I stupid, but that my stupidity renders me unworthy of love. So she tells us a few more things about shame, just in case we feel that shame, like vulnerability, has nothing to do with us. And the first thing she says is shame is universal. But only people who do not experience shame lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. So we have a difficult choice. Either we embrace our shame or we admit that we're sociopaths. So no one likes to talk about shame, and the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. There's simply no way out of this if what we really want out of life is meaningful and authentic human connection. So what do? Brown tells us to develop shame resilience. Shame resilience is the ability to be authentic when we are experiencing shame or feeling unworthy of love, without sacrificing our values, and to emerge from the shame experience with more courage, more compassion, more connection to empathy, which is the real antidote to shame. Now, the upside to all of Brown's research and talk about shame and vulnerability is that during her research, she discovered that some people were more resilient to shame than others. In further exploration with them, she discovered that these people have a stronger belief in their worthiness. Brown called these individuals wholehearted. So I would again suggest that it's not the philosophy of Humanistic Judaism that is problematic. In fact, if we remember our values and put them into action, we will create the environment we need to make these changes. So how does a community go about doing that? Well, first, you practice hospitality. When someone attends a program, they are in our temple home here. We want them to feel as welcomed as possible into our congregation of Humanistic Judaism. And because our approach to Judaism is unique, we want to ensure that visitors understand what we are about and why. Remember, Paul told us that hospitality is one step that helps create powerful community. The second is to be transparent. It's a new buzzword, yet it still has some pretty strong value. When both members and visitors feel that they have access to information and feel that they are able to make a contribution to the organization, we cultivate a feeling of accessibility and we create stakeholders and a path to leadership. There's much to learn about how both visitors and members define transparency. It's certainly more than posting our budget on our website. I do know that difficulty getting new and younger leaders are often caused by the feeling that the path to leadership has a 50-foot wall of 60 and 70-year-olds right in the middle of it. Next, we need to create a safe emotional environment. All committees and subgroups have the opportunity to create a safe environment where participants can share themselves openly without judgment. An atmosphere that provides for sharing different ideas without criticism, encourages authenticity and empathy, compassion, and that leads to intimacy and feeling valued and cared about. All those things that lead to more engaged members and that elusive emotional connection. We can also create opportunities for intimacy. It's very difficult to connect in large audiences. Now, clear success here at the temple is the Vivace Committee, a group organized around a common interest in music. Yet it is so much more. The bonds of friendship and caring transcend the project. Another way to create emotional connection might be to develop a program that would help participants acquire the skills to achieve wholehearted living. Now, Brown has 10 guideposts, and I'll read a couple of them for you. One is cultivating authenticity, one of my favorites. Cultivating self-compassion. Cultivating creativity. Cultivating play and rest. Cultivating calm and stillness. And cultivating laughter and song and dance. So I think that these 10 guideposts would make a really wonderful, wonderful opportunity to come together and to explore these ideas together. Because when we are in a place where we feel supported and we feel safe, when we know that what we say is confidential and will not be shared with others, and where we are treated with empathy and compassion, we will want to be in that place and return to it again and again and again. So Humanistic Judaism is based on the values that facilitate creating exactly that experience. So I volunteer to lead a group to explore these ideas. Let me know if you're interested, because I think that participating in such a group, we really will enter this adventure together and learn something that will be very important that we can share with other humanistic communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Please join us for our oneg afterwards. We've got a lot of food. And a reminder that the class starts on Sunday morning. I think it's going to be pretty big, so it's 10:30, and we'll go 7 sessions, and if we need an 8th and a 9th, we'll try to squeeze that in too. Okay, we're going to conclude with Shiru Shiru. There's a lot of verses here. Maybe we'll just do the Hebrew and the English. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. Shiru Shiru Olam, Shiru 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 Olam, Shilei Ha'imai Adonai, Yeravonu Be'amosli, Be'itanu Et Yomru Shiru Shiru, Shiru Shiru, sing song. Shiru Shiru, take a simple word, a single word. We breathe the sky, the tree, the bird, and we fill our hearts with joy. Shiru Shiru, Shiru Shiru, self-love. Shiru Shiru, the sunshine above. Shiru Shiru, the bells will all ringing and swinging
place up there.
How do you feel about that? Everything's been on hold. Get some unresolved stuff going.